Where's Zooble? I made this adventure really cool and mature, just for them!
Good morning, everyone. I hope your day is going well. Welcome back to another video of me analyzing amazing digital circus characters. And today, we'll be talking about Caine. This isn't the first time that I've talked about Caine on this channel, and if you want an in-depth look at his character before and leading up to his death, I'd suggest checking out this previous video. But for today, I want to talk specifically about Caine in the final episode, and how he was brought back to life. Or, I guess, how he brought himself back to life. And is that something that should have happened? Now, before anyone gets up in arms about what I just said, I just want to be clear, I like Caine. I think his redemption is a very interesting direction to take his character, and it's really sweet to see how much he and the others bonded because of it. My question isn't whether or not Caine quote-unquote deserved redemption, it's more about if redemption was the right choice from a writing perspective. And if it was the right choice, was it executed in a way that felt earned and satisfying? These questions are what we'll be exploring today, and hopefully by the end, we'll be able to come to some sort of conclusion. And I hope that all of you enjoy coming along for the ride. If this series is something that you've been enjoying, please make sure that you're subscribed. Next week, we'll be going over the final character in the roster, and I think it's something that you'll definitely want to be here for. And if you'd like to support these videos in a more monetary way, consider joining my Patreon. After this series, videos are going to be a little less frequent because I'm shifting my focus to a certain rewrite that I know a lot of people have been excited about. Patreon is the place to go for updates on that specific project, as well as early and ad-free access to videos, monthly Q&As, and so much more. And whether you love or hate this video, I'll be live on Twitch for the after-party stream at 11 AM PDT, so feel free to drop by and air your grievances. Or just hang out, that's okay too. With all of that said, I think it's time we get started. Grab some water, an entire rotisserie chicken, and get comfortable. Let's have a chat about Caine. Before we talk about Caine's revival, we do have to talk a little bit about his death. Caine was an incredibly important character in the Amazing Digital Circus, with him being the driving force behind nearly everything that happens to the other characters. What did his death actually mean to the circus members? What did he represent for them in a place that was often unfamiliar and strange? I talked about this before in my previous video, but Caine's presence for the circus members wasn't exactly a positive one. There's a lot of sympathy for Caine, especially if you're looking at him from the outside and in retrospect. But from the perspective of someone living in the circus, he wasn't exactly a comforting presence most of the time. Sure, he was doing his best to fulfill what he thought of as his purpose, but he would often do this by assuming that he knew best more than anyone. He would listen, but because of his background as an AI and how he was created, he just didn't have the context to actually help the circus members most of the time. And there are many instances where he prioritizes what he wants over what would actually make them more comfortable. And this lack of care, whether it's intentional or not, is shown very much in the way that he treats abstraction in the beginning.
And into the cellar you go! Now don't you go abstracting on me too! Seriously. Kaufmo abstracted? Why didn't anybody tell me?
It seems like an inconvenience, something almost trivial and silly. When someone abstracts, it clearly affects everyone very deeply, but Caine treats it similar to finding a spider in your house. Just brush it aside and don't think about it anymore. Never mind that it was a person you were talking to not too long ago. There's a joking, almost playful casualness in the way he treats this event that just comes across as cruel. And I'm confident that the way that he treats abstraction had a really big negative impact on the relationships that he was attempting to form in the circus. All of Caine's actions and feelings make sense when looking at it from his perspective, but that doesn't change the fact that overall he was a very immature and, frankly, unstable presence within the circus. No one really ever knew what to expect from him, other than him coming up with adventures every day. They weren't necessarily scared of him, but there was a general wariness in the way that they treated him. They knew to be cautious, even though Caine technically hadn't done anything yet. The easy way that he's able to command everything around them, including their physical bodies at some point, says a lot about what he could do, and that inspires caution, even if the circus members aren't consciously aware of it. And unfortunately, Caine ends up proving that that caution was very warranted. However, even with this context and Caine not really being someone you could go to with your personal problems, or even really trust to understand your needs and keep adventures safe, he was a constant presence. He was always there for the circus members, no matter what. He could heal them, he could fix the circus, he could create nearly anything. Even if his attempts are misguided and he often considers his solution to be the best one automatically, he's still able to help and often tries to. He's always been there, and they can rely on him to continue to be there, presumably forever. Until, of course, he's not. Caine's death is sudden, and his absence is felt pretty much immediately. And with that absence comes uncertainty. Even with everything that's happened and everything that he's done to them, it doesn't occur to any of the circus members to try and get rid of Caine. He's probably the only thing that can be considered permanent in a place like the circus. A place where even the people you know can be gone one day. But now the one constant in this crazy place is also gone, and everyone needs to deal with it. Caine probably represented a lot of things to different people in the circus, but more than anything else, he represents distraction. I've mentioned in some previous videos in this series that the circus is kind of inherently existential. It's a place where nothing anyone does really matters in the grand scheme of the real world. Nothing they do here will affect the things that they previously cared about, and that's something that eventually they have to deal with. But with Caine around, there was almost a smokescreen over this. They didn't really have to think about what they were gonna do or how they felt because Caine was working overtime to make sure they didn't have to. Ragatha even alludes to this in the first episode. The adventures are something fun to do that keeps them from going insane. And when Pomni questions if this is all there is to life, Caine gets very nervous and defensive, determined to keep them distracted. He's doing his very best to have them think only about the fun that they're supposed to be having, and not about the fact that they're going to be here doing this forever. And with him now gone, there's nothing to stop the circus members from facing that reality. It's no coincidence that Caine's death is immediately followed by the brain scan reveal. Without Caine's antics and his colorful world, the reality of their situation becomes clear and oppressive. Denial and distraction aren't options anymore. This is something that they must face for their own survival. And if they have any problems in the future, it's something that they're going to have to deal with on their own, without their resident set of dentures playing God and trying to make everything okay all the time. As a setup, I think it's really good. The zaniest, craziest part of this world is just gone, and in its place is a hole that the characters try to have to figure out how to cope with. The problem is, I don't know if we had nearly enough time to sit with this new status quo. The brain scan reveal is a big moment. The characters are learning that basically everything they knew was a lie. They're not real people trapped inside a computer, they're brain scans. A brief snapshot of someone that remained in this world while the real person continued on with their life outside. And for a lot of them, this seriously calls into question their personhood. It's a very big deal, and we can see how badly it's affecting everyone before they come back together. Except, do we actually see how badly it affects everyone? Obviously, everyone is upset to some degree by this news. They all go their separate ways, and it's very much not a good time. But other than with Pomni, we don't really go into full detail about how everyone is feeling. In a lot of ways, that's fine. We don't necessarily need an in-depth conversation with every single character, and we definitely don't have time for it. But everyone seems to come to terms with this completely off screen. For how much it seems to affect them in the moment they find out, in terms of actual screen time, they adjust fairly quickly. The presentation and use of a time skip conveniently makes it so whatever amount of time you think they would need to adjust, they can have. I don't know how to express it. It feels shoehorned in, almost. Pomni asserts that they still have each other, and this sentiment is seemingly rejected. And then just a little bit later, that actually is the solution and the truth to everything. I don't mind that this is the message. I think it's a really good one, but I just feel like there's a piece of reconciliation missing. And we don't really have time to get into it fully because we're focused on other things for a lot of the episode. And where does this leave us in terms of Caine? It's really strange because even though his death is set up as this huge event that's going to change how things work, and it very much sets up the idea that they're going to need to wrestle with a lot of existential dread, Caine himself is mentioned surprisingly little in the finale. His presence is felt in how they don't initially know how to handle Jax once he abstracts, but he's not mentioned by name, and other than that moment, they don't seem to miss him much at all. The one that seems the most upset about his passing seems to be Jax. Kinger obviously has some hangups about it, but in the moment he's more concerned with breaking the news that they're all brain scans. None of them talk about how they feel about Caine after his death, which I think ends up making his return feel weird. None of them ever talked about missing him or even seemed to think about him at all, and it makes his return feel intrusive to me. In my previous Caine video, I said that I didn't think Caine was gonna come back, and it's for this exact reason. I didn't think that there was enough time to really explore how the characters felt about Caine. And in order to make his return anything but horrifying for everyone else, there would need to be a lot of conversation where people are just processing his death. They would need to really consider how they felt about him and come to the conclusion that he wasn't inherently evil or dangerous. Even if they still expressed some concern and wariness when he came back, if they'd had those conversations, it would have felt a lot more natural that they welcomed him back even if they still had worries. As it is, it feels less like the characters are trying to be open and understanding, and more like the worries and fears these characters should be having are being brushed aside for the sake of time. A lot of Caine's development into a better person is done through a montage, and technically that's fine, but the way it was executed makes it feel more like the story is just saying, "Trust me, bro," instead of paying off things that have been set up over time. But before we talk about exactly how Caine's redemption was executed, let's talk a little bit about if his revival makes sense at all, both from a world-building and a narrative perspective. It's been said by others, and even me, that The Amazing Digital Circus is a character-focused series, not a world-building one. And while I still think that that's true, as time has gone on, I'm finding it more and more difficult to ignore the holes in the logic of The Amazing Digital Circus. Character writing and world-building aren't mutually exclusive. In an ideal world, they interact and support each other, making the story better overall. And while it's okay and normal to put more focus on one than the other, at a certain point, it starts to feel like you're neglecting parts of your story for no real reason, and I think it can end up weakening the writing overall. To some extent, I can understand that we don't need to know exactly how abstraction works, and it technically doesn't matter how electricity is still running in this building that apparently went out of business in the late 90s. At the end of the day, The Amazing Digital Circus is the way that it is because the series wants to explore themes of identity and existentialism, and it wants to be able to do that without the characters needing to worry about things like their job or the current weather pattern or whatever. This world is explicitly a tool for exploring how specific characters would react to a situation like this, and that's perfectly fine as a premise. A lot of world building is like that, where it's in service of a greater narrative, and there doesn't necessarily need to be an explanation for every little thing. But when you treat world building as loosely as The Amazing Digital Circus does, there can be consequences, because it means that the writer can essentially make up how things work for the sake of the story. This is, again, fine in a lot of contexts, but some of the intended gravity of things loses its weight because of it. If a writer can just make up how things work, then what are the consequences? What are the stakes, exactly? Why exactly is it that Caine can just decide to come back from the dead? Why is he the one character that can just will himself back into existence? Now, you might say he's an AI, so it's different for him. And while that's probably the intended assumption the audience is supposed to make, it's not really shown in the show that that's the case. And why is it that right now the specific mechanics of the computer matter, but they don't matter at all for any other questions the narrative raises? Because if Caine can come back from the dead like this, is it really so impossible to unabstract someone? Yes, from a meta perspective, abstraction is intended to indicate suicide in most cases. But why is death so permanent for the circus members and not for Caine? Because he was lucky enough to be an AI? Based on the reveal, everyone in the circus is an AI. Everyone here is ones and zeros, and everyone has the ability to conjure and change the circus. So what exactly is the difference? Why is someone coming back from suicide impossible, but coming back from your dad accidentally bashing your head in with a rock no big deal? I'm sure you could come up with some explanation about how abstracted people have their code corrupted while Caine was just deleted, and deleted code is more recoverable than corrupted code, but at the end of the day, to me, the difference just feels really arbitrary. And I think it comes down to the narrative clashing with what little we have established about abstraction. Or maybe it's more accurate to say that it's raising questions that the narrative is never going to answer, which is arguably more frustrating. Because so little about abstraction and how it works is established, there seems to be very little reason that Caine can't reverse abstraction. You could argue that because he never does prior to this, it's impossible, but that's not something that's ever confirmed. he's implied to be the cause of the first abstraction, which is a plot thread that doesn't end up going anywhere, but he seems more uncaring about previous abstractions than anything. Again, you could assume he can't based on the fact that he doesn't, but with his new status of destroyer of all barriers, what's stopping him from trying? In the end, this will probably come down to the mindset of the specific audience member watching. For many people, the exact world-building implications of Caine's return probably won't even cross their minds. Caine being in the recycling bin was already a common fandom joke/cope before the finale, so it's not that much of a stretch to make. But if you're someone like me and you like to think deeply about world building, and you had some expectations that the world building would end up mattering a little more than it did, things like this can be really distracting. If you're someone who thinks this doesn't matter, that's fine, and you probably enjoyed this moment without any confusion or further questioning. But at least for me, it just raises a lot of questions. Questions that, sadly, probably won't be answered. But beyond the exact world-building implications of this, does this revival make sense from a narrative standpoint? And I'm a little conflicted about that. I think I understand what the story is going for, but I just don't know if it comes across as well as it could have. I think Caine and Jax are two characters that are intended to act as foils to each other. They're both characters who are desperately performing, and it's only by shedding the mask and deciding to change that one of them is able to integrate into the group and become happier in their life. Jax refuses to open up until it's too late, and it literally kills her. You must accept yourself, or it will eat you alive and leave you with nothing. I understand that this is the intended messaging here, but there are a few things about Caine coming back that I think muddy the message a little bit. First of all, there's the world-building concerns. This is an example of the world-building affecting the narrative, like I mentioned earlier. Maybe it's just me, but I have a hard time believing that in a digital world like this one, it would be impossible for Jax to also make some sort of return. Yes, this would mean that all the other characters would unabstract as well, but the ending is already happy in basically every other way. Would it really have been so bad to do something like this? If your answer to that question is yes, that's your own opinion. I'm just making a point here. And that point is that I really don't think world building is as separate from telling a good character story as some people seem to think. I'll be talking about this a little bit more in next week's video, but both Jax and Caine at some point ask in some form of another if they're really unforgivable, and the narrative really only answers Caine with that. Yes, the narrative could be making a point about how effort is needed when trying to be better, but I don't think that point was clear enough. The second thing that kind of bothers me about the way that Caine returns is the fact that Caine is able to have all of this character development entirely on his own. There's been a very big emphasis throughout the series on opening up to other people. Making connections is the thing that saves you from the tar pit of existentialism. So having Caine just make all this progress completely by himself feels a little bit weird to me. This is compounded by what I mentioned earlier, where the other characters don't really think about how they feel about Caine. If the characters had had some conversations about wishing Caine had been able to get better, or just anything about how they felt, I think it could have helped this problem be at least less obvious, if not fix it altogether. And if Caine had somehow been able to witness these conversations, it could have given weight to his decision to try and be better and understand humans. It would show him that his paranoid and angry thoughts aren't reality. and give him reason to try and figure out more about them. As it is, he seems to only look at their human selves out of his own curiosity, and comes to a greater philosophical understanding completely by himself. And given how the rest of the series has gone, it feels just a little bit out of place. People talk about Jax being the favorite child of TADC, but let's be honest here. Out of all the characters, the favorite is probably Caine. Especially with how the story seems to bend around him a little bit in order to let him have this redemption arc without the speed bumps that I think would realistically be there for him. I think the dichotomy the narrative is trying to set up between Jax and Caine makes a lot of sense, and it makes sense for Caine to return in some fashion for the lesson that they're trying to convey. It just has some structural problems that I think make it a little harder for me to appreciate it. But putting those problems aside and just looking at the scene in isolation as a piece of art in and of itself, how does it hold up? Oh my gosh, guys, this scene is so pretty. Just look at what we're being gifted with. I'm an artist. I am not immune to eye candy in any way whatsoever, and I can very clearly see why they wanted this episode to be in theaters. The Amazing Digital Circus has always been well animated, but the artists really knocked it out of the park here, and it's just look at it! It's so gorgeously rendered that I can almost forgive it for being really confusing to watch the first time. Now that a few weeks have passed, I can once again see what was intended here. We're seeing Caine's journey to escape the void/recycling box, while also seeing the first time he created the circus and Scratch. But on a first viewing, I was really confused. I thought it was intended to show us that what we were seeing wasn't completely literal. Like we were seeing Caine float and interact with the void, but in reality we were seeing the symbolic red dot that was his code doing things. This moment is, I think, intended to show the parallels between Caine first discovering humans and him learning more about them now. And I like that idea in theory. It's a good parallel that shows how he's changed and how these two events mirror each other. And once again, it's absolutely beautiful to look at. But while good in theory and very nice on the eyes, I think this scene ends up being very confusing for a lot of people. I think the reason I'm so stuck on the abstraction point is because I really thought that Caine was bringing Scratch back to life here, and I know I'm not the only one who misunderstood it this way. I can understand the idea here, and I really like it. It just feels like it wasn't presented in the most clear way. And while I can understand the reason that you would want to show this, I don't know if that outweighs the importance of clarity. I also think that there were intended to be some parallels between Scratch and Caine that didn't end up fully panning out. We're told that Scratch has a brain tumor, and there's a whole lot of implications that come from how we're told about it. And the way that Caine decides to remove the blue AI, I don't know about you, but it kinda looks like pulling out a tumor. It's a bit of imagery that I think is very intentional, but I'm honestly not sure what to make of it. I think the parallel is very intentional, but because we don't really know anything about Scratch, this bit of cool symbolism doesn't feel like it has much weight to it. Kinger implies that Scratch's esoteric methods might have had something to do with his tumor, but is this something that Scratch also believed, or is this just Kinger's opinion? Because if Scratch believed that the tumor was something that gave him his creativity and ability to code, then it gives Caine's decision to remove it some extra depth. Caine enjoyed this power, and he clung to it for a long time as a means of controlling the circus members. because he was lonely and desperate for validation, and he was convinced that he knew what was right for everyone, and so many other reasons. But ultimately, it was hurting him, causing him to act erratically and in ways that hurt others. And removing it is better for him and the people around him. And I don't know, the idea of that being what Scratch went through in life, or maybe Scratch refusing to get treatment because he was convinced he wouldn't be himself after his removal, that's an idea that I think could have been interesting to explore. As it is, it feels like this ended up just being some interesting imagery, because we don't know enough about Scratch as a character for him and Caine to truly be foils of each other. I feel like there could have been something more to this, but there just wasn't time to expand on it, and that makes me a little bit sad. And time management is really the recurring problem that I keep running into here. And it continues when we look at how the other characters react to Caine's return. It really feels like everyone adjusts way too quickly to him coming back. They never had any opportunity to talk about how they felt about him being gone, so their feelings about him coming back are lacking weight. It feels like they should feel nothing but fear and dread based on how he last treated them, but they're pretty much completely willing to take him on his word that he's changed and realized that what he did was wrong. For example, Zooble says that it'll take time to build up trust, but they're glad to see him again.
Caine, you really caused a lot of hell for us. It's gonna take some time to build up any kind of trust between us again. But, despite all that, it's good to have you back.
This is a very nice sentiment, and it's important that Zooble is the one to say it, since you can argue that they were the only one really honest with Caine when he was around. But I have to ask, why exactly are they glad to see him? Their last interactions involved them trying to stop Caine from using them as toys for his own amusement. They have never expressed anything for him other than wariness and mild disdain. What possible reason could they have for missing him? It's not impossible for the cast to come to appreciate or sympathize with Caine in the time that he was gone, but if it happened, we never got to see any of it. So it ends up feeling like the narrative is speedrunning, skipping past the more difficult parts of reconciliation for the sake of a feel-good finale. And that's probably, honestly, exactly what's happening. Because none of these characters have talked about missing Caine or even thinking about him very much. There should be a lot more hesitation about his return. There should be more wariness and caution, but because there's barely any time left, we need to skip past it. And I think it makes the moment feel just a little bit artificial. And honestly, I think there's something very simple that could have been done to make it more believable that the characters would trust that Caine had changed. Here, let me just drag it around there, hold that down, and there. Much better. Yeah, it really bothers me that Caine spends most of this finale floating above everyone. This is intended to be a reformed Caine, trying to relate to them because he understands them better now. But he still makes the choice to be above them. I don't think this was intentional, but symbolically, it makes it seem like he still views them as something less, and it makes the whole scene just a little bit less effective for me. They're putting so much effort into making Caine look really sorry, and isn't he just a sad little guy holding his cane like that? But this whole time, when he's supposedly at his lowest and willing to accept anything that the circus members might decide, he's still floating above them. He's supposed to be seeing them as equals, and he's not even at their same eye level. The moment in the void where Caine falls out of the air and sprints toward the door is really effective, because it showcases just how desperate Caine is. It shows how visceral his emotions are, how badly he just wants to escape and find a new chance at life. And after an entire show of him flying everywhere, having him walk like everyone else is humanizing. It really makes him feel more vulnerable and sincere. And that's why it really bothers me that outside of this moment, he's still depicted as floating the rest of the time. Not only would having him walk been a visual way to show that he is less powerful now without the blue AI, it would show that he's making an effort to be on the same level as everyone else. He wants to understand them, and he doesn't see standing among them as demeaning. He's exactly where he wants to be, and him walking, whether by choice or because he literally can't fly anymore, would be a good way of communicating that. And the fact is, none of these other characters have really seen Caine walking around, except in brief moments. It would show them that he really is trying to understand them, and making the effort to meet them where they're at. I know this seems like a really small detail, but once I noticed it, it's something that just really bothers me. He's depicted in pretty much all the following happy ending scenes walking with his own 2 feet on the ground like everyone else, so why in this moment of vulnerability is he flying? It just feels like a bit of an oversight in what is meant to be a very down-to-earth and emotional moment. But now, let's put all of that aside. Laying out everything this way with all of my critiques as well as the things that I like and the intentions and what actually worked, we're still left with one big question. With the ending that these characters all experience, was it necessary for Caine to come back? And the answer is honestly yes. Even with all the problems I have regarding execution, it's undoubtable that Caine needed to come back for the finale to work. The reveal of the characters' lives outside the circus is integral to them accepting their lives within it, and being able to find meaning beyond endless distraction. And as I mentioned at the start, it feels like Caine is intended to be an opposite to Jax. Someone who decided to change and was able to find real happiness where she didn't allow herself to. Caine's journey towards acceptance is a very important part of the show, and something that's present from the very beginning. And while I didn't initially expect him to return, I can see why he did, and I really appreciate how wonderful the ending was. I just feel that it needed a little more time to fully develop. And that's a criticism that I've been saying a lot, haven't I? And not just in this video, but in previous ones in the series. How the amazing digital circus decided to manage its time, be it with different character arcs and different themes, is a very common critique of the show. And it's one that I clearly stand by. I think the series has some presentation problems where certain things needed more time to develop, and maybe some other things could have been cut. But even though I think this is a critique worth making, I'm unsure how much could have easily been done about it. It's easy for me to come in after the fact and talk about what could have needed improvement, but it's much harder to steer that ship when you're in the middle of things. Because making an entire show, even a short series like this one, is really, really hard. To quote H. Bomber Guy, telling a story is jumping off a cliff and building your wings on the way down. I don't say this because I think the series is beyond criticism, but I want to be fair when I look at everything as a whole. It's honestly a miracle that this show was able to be made at all, and it's a miracle that it ended up being as good as it is. Maybe it's not perfect, but if a show needed to have a perfect ending to be acceptable media, we'd be left with basically nothing to watch. And I think those human imperfections, however frustrating they might be, are what make stories really interesting and fun to analyze. The imperfections are what make something what it is. And there's something beautiful about something that's clearly flawed, but is made with passion regardless. I have my problems with the way that Caine's return was executed, but that doesn't change the fact that him coming back is important for the story, and it leads to some amazing character moments and a really beautiful and clearly passionate ending to a show that grew really big really fast. Caine is a complicated character who looked like he was destined for a tragic end, but I think him coming back is really what reinforces one of the big themes in the series. You can always choose to be a better person, and that's a worthwhile thing to do. And often, even if you feel that the things you did are unforgivable, you'll find that there are a lot of people willing to help you a lot more than you thought they would. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Caine is someone who probably has several hours worth of video essay potential in him, so if you want me to talk more about him in the future, please let me know. As a reminder, the finale of this series will be coming out next week, so if you don't want to miss it, be sure you're subscribed. And if you want a chance to talk to me about the video, or about anything in general, be sure to join me for the after party stream. If you get there early enough, you might even get to name one of the 5 dogs we brought home last time. And I'd like to take this moment to thank all of my Patreon supporters, including but not limited to Perplexia Sphinx, Snick, Tree, Lurch18489, Sphinx, I May Be Dumb, Cassidy the Puppet Wraith, and Gibbous Rat. Thank you all so much for your continued support. You help to make sure I can keep making videos even when I'm not uploading quite as frequently. And thank you all once again for watching. Take care of yourselves and each other, and I hope to see you all again soon. Bye!